They said the desert would swallow her whole. They said no woman could survive so far out in the Arizona territory, especially alone after her husband's death. But Rachel Morgan never listened to rumors. One scorching afternoon, she found a wounded Navajo man, bloodied and feverish, collapsed by her well. Instead of fearing him, she gave him water. She even tended to his wounds. The next day, dawn broke to the sight of an entire band of Navajo warriors silently surrounding her small homestead, and with them came questions Rachel wasn't sure she was ready to answer, questions that could change her life forever. The Arizona sun was unrelenting, pouring heat down upon every living thing. Dry, cracked earth stretched to the horizon, painting the land in dull browns and muted yellows. Each gust of wind kicked up swirls of dust that made it nearly impossible to see without shielding one's eyes. In the far distance, low mesas and red rock formations rose like guardians of a hidden world. Some said the desert had a spirit of its own. Others swore it was a graveyard, where only the strongest survived. Rachel Morgan certainly felt like she'd stepped onto a battleground. She stood beside the remains of her well, its timber edges bleached by the sun, and showing the wear of countless scorching summers. The water level had dropped so low that she worried daily about her ability to keep her little homestead alive. This was the life she had chosen, or perhaps more accurately, the life that had chosen her when her husband Daniel died of a sudden illness the previous spring. Although townsfolk from Prescott to Flagstaff insisted a woman couldn't manage a farm alone, Rachel was too proud, too stubborn, or maybe too foolish to leave. The land held memories of Daniel, their quiet walks at dusk, the patch of vegetables he loved to tend, the old cottonwood tree where they first carved their initials. Selling it would be like abandoning his spirit to the desert. So she stayed. She woke before dawn each morning to haul water from the well wrangle, the few sheep that had survived the harsh winter, and keep the house standing with her own hands and limited resources. The ranch itself, barely large enough to call a ranch, was on the outskirts of the nearest settlement, Willow Bend, which lay about 12 miles east. Every month or so, she would gather enough courage and necessity to make the trek either by her old wagon or her horse Ellie. There she'd buy flour, sugar, coffee, and sometimes trade anything she managed to produce with the local storekeeper, Hank Weston. But that morning's routine was shattered by the sight of something unusual near her well. Rachel spotted what at first appeared to be a bundle of cloth or an injured animal. She squinted in the bright sun, stepping cautiously over sharp rocks and hardened soil. Drawing closer, she gasped. A man, unconscious, or nearly so. His clothes were torn, and he clutched a blood-soaked bandage at his side. She could see his skin was sun-cracked, burned from too long out in the open. Even from a distance, she recognized the distinctive clothing and braided black hair of a Navajo warrior. Just a week earlier, Rachel had overheard a heated conversation in Willow Bend about increased tension in the territory. Someone mentioned the name of a real private from the cavalry, Private James Everett, who had been assigned to manage conflicts with the Navajo. Rumors circulated that the army wanted to push the Navajo further east, and the Navajo, by all accounts, resisted. The men in the saloon spoke of possible raids. People were on edge, especially those living on remote homesteads, like Rachel's. More than one concerned neighbor urged her to relocate. But here he was, an actual Navajo man, alone and gravely injured. Despite all the warnings, despite the fear pricking at her consciousness, Rachel was incapable of stepping over a wounded person. The man's face was chiseled strong, but contorted in pain. He groaned softly, eyes fluttering open. For a brief second, they locked eyes. She saw terror there, a terror that possibly mirrored her own. He tried to speak, but his throat produced only a raspy sound. Rachel carefully lifted his head. "Easy," she whispered, reaching for the small canteen at her belt. The last of her morning water supply gurgled into his parched mouth. He coughed and sputtered, but relief softened his features a moment later. He tried to pull away, as if expecting her to strike him, but he was too weak to resist. "It's okay," Rachel soothed. "I'm not here to hurt you." She had no formal medical training, save what she'd learned from her grandmother back in Missouri. But that was enough to help her see that he needed more water and rest. Checking the bandage, she discovered a bullet wound just below his ribs. The bullet might still be in there, she couldn't be sure. A sick feeling settled in her stomach. If the wound became infected, the man would die. She did the only thing she could think of, help him into the shade of the porch. She half dragged, half supported his weight across the dusty yard, her heart hammering in her chest. Every throb of his pain seemed to echo in her own body. Once they were under the shade of the porch's overhang, she poured more water into his mouth and pressed a damp cloth to his forehead. She wrestled with a surge of fear, ignoring the voice in her head that said she was making a dangerous choice. Even if she could keep him alive, what if this triggered retaliation from his people, or worse yet, accusations of treachery from the local militia? Yet as the man lapsed into an exhausted sleep, his breathing ragged, her hesitation vanished. He was a person in need. She could no more turn him away than stop her heart from beating. As dusk approached, the sun's anger relented, painting the sky in swathes of orange and pink. Rachel checked on her wounded guest every hour, refreshing the damp cloth and coaxing a few sips of water through his cracked lips. She carefully unwound the makeshift bandage, a piece of cloth he'd probably torn from his own shirt, and winced at the sight of the wound. It looked angry and swollen. She cleaned it as best she could, biting her own lip at the man's every groan of agony. She thought of heading to Willow Bend for Dr. McFarlane, but that would mean leaving the man alone and traveling nearly half a day there and back. If he was still alive when she returned, he might have bled out, or been taken by his own people, or found by cavalry riders who might mistake him for an enemy. The stakes were high. Another solution arose in her mind. She remembered hearing that some of the Navajo used plant poultices or certain herbs to treat wounds, but she had no such knowledge at her disposal. The best she could do was attempt to remove the bullet if it was lodged inside and keep the wound clean. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she lit a lantern inside the house. She prepared a basin of water and boiled a few rags. Her hands trembled. She'd removed a bullet once before from her own husband's arm when a hunting mishap grazed him. But that bullet was superficial, not lodged in deep muscle. Still, she had to try. Returning outside, she kneeled beside the Navajo man whose face glistened with sweat. By the wavering light of the lantern, she found the entry wound. Carefully, with a small knife sterilized in boiling water, she probed. He stirred, gasping in pain. She murmured soothing words, though she doubted he could hear them. After a few seconds that felt like hours, she felt the metal. Gritting her teeth, she eased the bullet out. Blood immediately trickled from the hole, and she pressed a clean rag firmly against it to stanch the flow. For a moment, she feared she'd lose him right there. But then his eyelids fluttered, and he exhaled a shaky breath. When the bleeding slowed, she washed the wound with the boiled water and wrapped him in fresh bandages made from one of her sheets. Time would tell if infection would set in. She whispered a silent prayer. Inside, she gathered her most meager meal, a small piece of cornbread, some dried beans, and the last of her coffee. Her appetite was absent, twisted by worry, but she forced down a few bites. She had a strong feeling that the next day would bring even heavier burdens. She glanced at the man, once more lit by the gentle glow of moonlight on the porch. Oddly enough, a strange calmness had come over him, as though her care had offered him a sliver of peace, at least for the moment. Then she recalled the old rumor from the saloon that Navajo warriors traveled in groups, never leaving their own behind if they could help it. This man must have gotten separated somehow. Perhaps his companions were searching for him. The idea made her shiver. If a band of Navajo warriors descended upon her homestead, what would they think of her presence, crouched over their wounded brother? Would they see an angel of mercy or an enemy? She tried to push the thought aside and focus on the immediate task, keeping him alive through the night. She set her lantern by the window so she could see him and rummaged in a trunk for the old rifle Daniel left behind. Its stock was chipped and it had only a few bullets, but it was all she had. She placed it near the doorway, careful not to appear threatening. But if she needed to defend herself, it was there. The night pressed on, and the man slept fitfully. Each time he moaned or shifted, Rachel jolted upright, heart pounding. She told herself to be calm, to breathe. She had done the right thing. If she lost him to his injuries, she didn't know how she would live with the guilt. Out in the desert, a coyote howled, and she heard the distant rustle of underbrush. Could be a harmless desert hare, or it could be any number of threats. The night seemed endless. Finally, exhaustion overcame her. She wrapped herself in a thin blanket, sitting upright on a rocking chair by the window. Her eyes drooped, and she drifted off into a restless sleep. When she opened her eyes again, dawn's light was already kissing the horizon. The morning arrived with a stillness that made Rachel's heart race. It was the kind of oppressive quiet that so often preceded a storm, but the sky was clear. Her gaze snapped to the Navajo man on the porch. His breathing sounded steadier, and though he appeared groggy, he was alert enough to notice her approach. She knelt beside him. "Good morning," she said softly. He blinked, obviously struggling to form words. When he tried to lift his head, pain twisted his face. She placed a reassuring hand on his arm. She offered him more water. This time, he sipped, carefully swallowing with visible effort. Then he spoke in a low, halting tone. Rachel could make out only a few English words. "Thank you." "You." It was enough to bring a small smile to her lips. She wondered about his name. She'd heard a few Navajo names in passing, from traders who came through Willow Bend, men like Billy Fellows, who talked about Navajo neighbors with a measure of respect. She heard of men called Kla Yazi Besenti, but she didn't want to assume. All she could do was place her hand against her own chest and say, "I'm Rachel, Rachel Morgan." He studied her for a moment, then pointed weakly to himself. "So," he whispered. "So, Yazi." She repeated it gently, "So." A nod confirmed her correct pronunciation. She smiled. "Nice to meet you, Tso." He shifted slightly, glancing around, taking in his surroundings as though trying to gauge his safety. Rachel realized how vulnerable he must feel. Alone, wounded in the care of a stranger, one who was outside his culture and territory. She wanted to reassure him, but before she could utter another word, a strange hush fell across the yard. She heard Ellie, her horse, whinny in the corral, stamping nervously. The sheep bleated in alarm. Instinct clenched her stomach. Slowly she rose and stepped off the porch. A faint sound caught her ear. The soft footfall of horses over sand, the clank of bridles. She walked past the corner of the house, and her breath caught in her throat. A line of Navajo warriors, a dozen at least, sat astride their horses. The animals snorted, pawing the ground, and their riders wore stoic expressions. Each man held a rifle or bow, though none pointed it directly at her. They formed a silent circle around her homestead, effectively cutting off any route of escape. She couldn't help recalling rumors of raids and skirmishes, but these men did not look like the mindless marauders the townsfolk so often whispered about. Their eyes were keen, their posture unwavering. She raised her hands slowly, signaling she held no weapon. The old rifle in her home felt very far away. Swallowing hard, she stepped forward. A tall warrior, in front wearing a band of turquoise beads around his neck, narrowed his eyes. He said something in a language she couldn't understand. So, from the porch, managed a weak reply. The tall warrior's face flickered with relief, then hardened again, as though torn between concern and caution. Rachel's heart hammered against her ribcage. She attempted a careful approach, keeping her gestures slow. "He's injured," she said, pointing to Tso on the porch. "I found him by my well." The tall warrior gave her a measured look, then dismounted gracefully. Another man joined him. They moved past Rachel without a word, stepping onto the porch to inspect Tso. Rachel felt sudden panic. Would they blame her if Tso was near death? Would they think she caused his wounds? The men bent over Tso, conversing in low tones. Tso murmured, gesturing weakly towards Rachel. She caught fragments of the exchange, her name repeated, possibly in gratitude. The tall warrior turned, faced her, and inclined his head. It was a small gesture, but it sent a wave of relief through her. She felt the tension in the air lessen, though the other warriors remained on their horses watchful. Moments later, the tall warrior turned to his men and spoke a flurry of commands. Several men dismounted, gathering around Tso, carefully preparing to move him. Rachel rushed forward, alarmed at the idea of jostling his wound. She pantomimed caution, showing them the bandages. The warriors nodded gentler now, as they lifted Tso in a makeshift stretcher fashioned from thick blankets and poles. Just then, she noticed a new rider, an older man with lines of wisdom on his face, approach from the back of the group. He bore himself with quiet authority. The tall warrior deferred to him, stepping aside. The older man gazed at Tso, then turned his dark eyes upon Rachel. With a voice tinged by a slight accent, he spoke in English, surprising her. "You cared for Tso?" he asked. Rachel's throat felt dry. She nodded. "He was hurt. I only did what I could." The older man studied her face for a long moment, as if assessing her very soul. "I am Nezbagay," he said. "Tso is my nephew." Rachel released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Rachel Morgan," she replied, her voice trembling. "I live here alone." Nezbagay's gaze flicked around the property, taking in the meager livestock, the tilled soil turned dusty in the drought, and finally, her simple home. "You have done a kindness," he said at last, when many would not. Unsure how to respond, she lowered her eyes. "He needed help." Nezbagay nodded. "We will take him. He will heal among his people." He paused, then, in a softer tone, said, "Thank you." He signaled to the men, and they began to carry Tso away. Rachel felt a pang of worry. "Will he survive?" she asked, her voice catching on the last word. Nezbagay offered a small, reassuring smile. "He is strong. And with the bullet removed, he has a chance." She nodded relief, mingling with uncertainty. She wanted to help more, perhaps provide extra bandages or the meager medicinal supplies she had, but she had no idea if such an offer would be welcome. It was then that the tall warrior stepped up beside Nezbagay and spoke in Navajo. Nezbagay responded curtly, and the tall warrior glared at Rachel, suspicion in his eyes. "This is Tso's brother, Sandoval Yazi Nezbagay," explained to her. "He is grateful, but he also fears outsiders." She recalled the warnings from Willow Bend. "I understand," she replied, voice trembling. "I'm no threat." Nezbagay gave her a final nod. Then quietly, as an afterthought, he said, "If you have trouble, perhaps we will help you. Someday." Before she could interpret those words, he turned and followed the men bearing Tso. The entire band mounted their horses and rode away. The whirlwind of hooves, dust, and quiet intensity left Rachel standing alone, feeling as though she'd just witnessed something monumental. She watched until they disappeared into the shimmering horizon. Then she realized her hands were shaking. This was more than she'd ever bargained for, a brush with a culture she knew so little about, and a reminder that in this harsh land, survival often depended upon simple acts of humanity. Still trembling, she retreated into her house, the door creaking behind her. She'd saved a life, but she sensed that her own was about to change in ways she could never have foreseen. By late morning, Rachel decided she needed supplies from Willow Bend. After the tension of the early hours, she found herself craving human contact, someone to talk to, even if it was just the no-nonsense storekeeper Hank Weston or her friend Mary Campbell, who ran the local boarding house. She also knew she had to replenish her stock of Bandaged coffee and a few other essentials. The time had come to see the reaction of the town to her strange encounter. Hitching Ellie to the small wagon, she made her way along the dusty track that led into Willow Bend. The desert's vastness weighed on her, but she also found an odd sense of comfort in its sweeping solitude. Her mind replayed the morning's events, the circle of warriors, Tso's pained face, Nezbagay's measured words. She wondered if Tso would truly heal. She wondered if the gesture of kindness might have repercussions for her or for the Navajo band. Willow Bend was a modest settlement of a few dozen wooden buildings with a single main street that always seemed cluttered with wagons, horses, and the occasional stagecoach. The sign outside Hank Weston's general store creaked in the breeze, announcing the store's name in faded black letters. Rachel parked the wagon out front, tied Ellie to the hitching post, and walked inside. A familiar bell jingled above the door. Hank Weston, a thick-set man with a bushy mustache, greeted her with a nod. He wore his usual apron, streaked with flour and dust from rummaging through barrels of goods. "Morning, Mrs. Morgan," he said, taking stock of her tired face. "You look like you've had a rough few days." Her lips twitched into a wan smile. Could say that she answered, glancing around the shelves. As she collected the items she needed: flour, salt, coffee, a roll of bandages. Hank looked on with curiosity. "Anything you want to talk about?" he ventured. She paused. "Hank, have there been any incidents with the Navajo lately?" He scratched at his stubbly chin. "Well, rumors sure have been swirling. A couple ranchers reported missing livestock. Folks are whispering about raids. The Army's been sending out patrols too. Just last week I heard Private James Everett was scouring the region for any sign of hostiles." He lowered his voice. "You be careful out there, Rachel. Some folks think the worst of all Navajo, and that can lead to violence." Her heart skipped. "Yes, I'll be cautious." She kept her voice steady, not wishing to reveal her encounter. She hurriedly paid for the items. Just as she was about to leave, Mary Campbell entered. The petite boarding house proprietor had bright hazel eyes and curly brown hair. She caught sight of Rachel and rushed over, pulling her into a warm embrace. "Rachel, it's been too long. How are things on your place? Is the drought treating you better?" Rachel sighed. "Barely. I'm managing." Mary eyed her carefully. There's something you're not telling me. She turned to Hank. Mind if we talk privately? Hank just waved them off, returning to unpacking a crate of canned peaches. Mary led Rachel outside, across the street, to a small wooden bench beneath the shade of an awning. All right, out with it, Mary insisted. At first, Rachel hesitated, worried about how Mary might react, but the burden pressed on her chest until words spilled out. She recounted how she found So tended to him, and then the confrontation with the Navajo warriors. She left out certain details, like the bullet removal, but Mary still listened wide-eyed. When Rachel finished, Mary let out a low whistle. That's quite a thing, Rachel. You're lucky you weren't hurt. I know, Rachel agreed. But they didn't act like savage raiders. I think they were just protecting their own. I couldn't just leave him to die. Mary laid a hand on Rachel's arm. You did the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But be careful who you share this story with. Some folks might not see it the same way. Rachel thought of how certain townspeople always looked for an excuse to pick a fight, especially with the cavalry fueling the tension. I won't shout it from the rooftops, she said. I only told you because I trust you. Mary's eyes shone with empathy. If you need anything, help, a place to stay, someone to talk to you, come see me. Understand? Rachel nodded, grateful for her friend's support. They parted ways with promises to keep in touch. Rachel loaded her purchases into the wagon and turned for home. On her way out of town, she passed a group of cavalry soldiers. She recognized the bright stripes on their uniforms, the rifles slung across their backs. One of them, a young man with sandy hair, glanced her way, eyes full of curiosity. She thought of Zoe once more and prayed that the army wouldn't cross paths with his band, at least not until Zoe had recovered. As the wagon rattled along the road back, Rachel caught herself humming a lullaby her mother used to sing. The day's tension still weighed on her, but a small spark of hope remained. Perhaps, just perhaps, she might not be alone out there in the desert. In saving Zoe, she might have found a thread of connection to another people. Whether that thread would hold strong or unravel into conflict was a mystery for the days to come. Days turned into a week. Each morning, Rachel rose early, her chores more grueling in the dry heat. She repaired fences, watered her few crops, and tried to keep her animals alive. Every so often, she found herself scanning the horizon, half expecting to see Zoe's band return. But they didn't. The desert remained quiet, save for the occasional coyote call at night or the rustle of tumbleweeds. Rachel tried to focus on her daily grind, but the memory of Zoe's anguished face haunted her. Had he survived? She wondered whether the bullet removal had truly saved him, or if infection had set in afterward. One late afternoon, while she carried a bucket of water from the well to the house, she noticed a single figure on horseback in the distance. Her heart leaped into her throat. Quickly, she set the bucket down, fetched her rifle from inside, and waited by the door. As the figure came closer, she realized it was not a Navajo warrior, but a white man, dressed in dusty cavalry blues. The horse was a weary bay, and the rider, thin with sandy blonde hair, looked equally travel-worn. She recognized him from Willow Bend Private James Everett himself. He reined his horse to a stop near her porch, scanning the yard. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Name's Private Everett. I'm with the U.S. Army out of Fort Whipple." Rachel forced a polite smile. "Hello, Private. What brings you all the way out here?" He dismounted, dusted off his uniform, and cleared his throat. "We've had reports. Some folks say Navajo warriors have been spotted around these parts. We're checking on ranches to ensure everyone's safe." She tightened her grip on the rifle, though she held it pointed at the ground. "Appreciate the concern, but I haven't seen anyone." He peered at her homestead with keen eyes. "Is that so? And you live here alone, ma'am? Rachel's stomach twisted. Since my husband passed, yes. He frowned, a line forming between his eyebrows. Must be tough these parts being so remote. She nodded, unwilling to elaborate. A trickle of sweat slid down her temple. She tried to gauge Everett's intentions. Was he fishing for information about the Navajo? I won't take much of your time, he continued. But I'm curious, any strange activity lately? Sounds at night. Missing livestock. She shook her head. No, private. Nothing out of the ordinary. The words tasted like a lie. She hated lying, but she felt no loyalty to the army. She had saved a life. She wasn't about to betray Tso's people. He studied her carefully, and for a moment the tension crackled. Then he forced a smile. Glad to hear it, he said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. If you do see or hear anything suspicious, you should report it to the fort or the local detachment. We're trying to keep folks safe. I'll remember that, she replied, her voice cool. He lingered another minute, as if waiting for her to crack. Finally, he tipped his hat again and remounted. Take care, ma'am. Then he was off the horse, kicking up a cloud of dust. Rachel didn't move until he was just a speck on the horizon. The rifle felt heavy in her hands. Slowly she brought the bucket inside and latched the door behind her. She wondered if any neighbors had seen the band of warriors departing her land. If so, how long before rumors turned into accusations? That night, sleep came in fits. She tossed and turned, dreaming of the cavalry of Private Everett pounding on her door with accusations of aiding the enemy. Another nightmare showed Tso's band returning in the dead of night. She awoke in a sweat, heart pounding, struggling to separate fear from reality. When the sun rose, she resolved to be ready for whatever came next. She cleaned Daniel's old rifle, checking the few bullets she had left. She made sure her horse was healthy enough to travel at a moment's notice should she need to run. But every time she thought of fleeing, she remembered the promise she'd made to herself, to Daniel's memory, to keep this homestead alive. The desert was a place of secrets. She'd learned that lesson well over the past week. Whether it was the army's hunts for hostiles or the hush around Tso's rescue, the sands seemed to cover up truths that no one wanted to confront. All Rachel could do was hold on, hoping her small acts of kindness wouldn't ignite a storm too large for her to weather. Several more days passed in uneasy silence. Then one evening, just before sundown, Rachel was startled by a sudden knock at her door. She set down the plate she was drying and grabbed her rifle. With measured steps, she approached, heart hammering. "Who's there?" "It's me," came a voice, familiar yet unexpected. "Mary Campbell." Surprised, Rachel opened the door to find Mary standing there, in a simple blue dress, face flushed from the long ride. Next to her stood a teenage boy she recognized from Willow Bend, Tommy Reeves, who sometimes ran errands for the blacksmith. Behind them, quietly, stood a Navajo woman wearing a long, colorful skirt and a woven shawl, her hair tied into a traditional sieo bun. Rachel's shock was evident. She quickly ushered them inside. "Mary, what in the world?" Mary closed the door behind her and turned to Rachel with a grave expression. "I met her in town," she said, gesturing to the Navajo woman. "Her name is Hasba. She's Tso's cousin." Rachel's eyes widened. She glanced at Hasba, who nodded, offering a timid smile. Mary explained, "She came looking for you. She found me at the boarding house, said she needed to speak with the woman who helped Tso Yazzie. We decided to come here quietly." Tommy Reeves removed his hat, looking around nervously. "I'm just along for the ride to show the way, ma'am. Don't want no trouble." Rachel's heart pounded. "Is Tso all right?" Hasba cleared her throat, her English uncertain but she managed to convey her words softly. So, he is better healing. He wants you to come. Come where Rachel asked, confusion swirling. Hasbar tried to piece together her words. Our home? Near the canyon, the red rocks. He'd talk. Thanks. Rachel stared, emotions tangled. Zoe was alive. He wanted to thank her, but traveling into Navajo territory would be risky, especially with the army patrols and the ever-present tension. Still, she felt a tug of responsibility and maybe curiosity too. Mary touched Rachel's arm. I told Hasbar, it's dangerous for you to go alone. But she says Zoe's band is peaceful, they won't harm you. They've offered a guarantee of safe passage if you're willing. Rachel's mind raced. The army might see this as fraternizing with the enemy, but Zoe was no enemy to her. She turned to Hasbar. When would we leave? Hasbar glanced at the window where the sun was setting. Night, safer, no soldiers. She gestured outside, where a horse was tethered, one Tommy must have led for her. You come, I show the way. Mary spoke quietly. Rachel, I'll stay here to watch your place if you want. I'm not sure if it's wise for me to go too, might attract more attention with a crowd. Tommy says he'll return to Willow Bend in the morning. But, are you sure you want to do this? Rachel felt a swirl of anxiety, yet also a strange conviction. She recalled Nez Begay's words. If you have trouble, perhaps we will help you. Someday. She thought of the kindness Zoe's family had shown that day, carrying him away gently. If Zoe was asking for her, perhaps it was important. She nodded slowly. Decision made. Yes, I'll go. I want to be sure he's truly well. Mary exhaled, relief and worry mixing in her expression. All right, I'll mind your homestead. Let me help you pack a small bag of provisions. It took less than half an hour to prepare. Rachel changed into a sturdy skirt and boots, braided her hair back from her face, and packed a few essentials, water, jerky, a blanket. She took her rifle, though she hoped she wouldn't need it. Hasbar waited patiently, occasionally speaking softly with Tommy. When the sky had grown dark enough to conceal their departure, Rachel walked out to meet them. Mary gave her a tight hug. Be safe. If you're not back in 2 days, I'll come looking. Rachel tried to manage a brave smile. She climbed onto Ellie, who whinnied in mild protest at the late ride. Hasbar mounted her own horse, and Tommy prepared to follow for a short distance. Under the moonlight, they set off across the rocky terrain, heading north toward the red rock canyons that the Navajo called home. The journey stretched through the night. Hasbar led with uncanny navigation, weaving through ravines and crossing dry creek beds. The landscape, illuminated by pale moonlight, felt ethereal. Towering rock formations glowed silver, casting long shadows that danced like spirits across the desert floor. Rachel had never ventured this far from her homestead except on well-trodden roads. Now she realized how vast and mysterious this land truly was. They traveled mostly in silence, broken occasionally by Hasbar's murmured instructions, or Tommy's whispered expletives when his horse stumbled over loose gravel. After several hours, Tommy halted near a rocky outcrop. I'll head back now, ma'am, he said. No point going any deeper. I promised Mrs. Campbell I'd be back by dawn. He lifted his hand in a reluctant farewell. Good luck. With that, the boy turned his horse and vanished into the darkness. Rachel watched him go, feeling a flicker of apprehension. She was now alone with Hasbar in the wilderness, heading toward a Navajo encampment. Still, she pressed on, trusting Hasbar's soft reassurances that all would be well. At last, just as the sky began to lighten, Hasbar halted at the rim of a canyon. She pointed downward. Far below, half shrouded by shadow, Rachel saw a cluster of hogans traditional Navajo dwellings, rounded and made of logs and earth. Wisps of smoke rose from small fires. A few horses grazed on sparse patches of vegetation. The scene was strangely serene. They descended a narrow path carved into the canyon wall. At the bottom, two Navajo men stood watch. They recognized Hasbar nodding in greeting, but stared at Rachel curiously. Hasbar spoke to them in Navajo, presumably explaining the situation. The men relaxed, stepping aside to let her pass. Rachel dismounted, following Hasbar on foot. Women in colorful dresses emerged from a Hogan, children trailing behind them. Some pointed and whispered. A few older men, stoic and silent, watched it from a distance. The entire camp seemed on alert, yet there was no hostility in their faces, only caution and curiosity. Hasbar led Rachel to the largest Hogan, gesturing for her to wait outside. Moments later, Nesbegay emerged, his expression calm but serious. "Rachel Morgan," he greeted, dipping his head. "You came." She nodded, throat dry. Hasbar said, "So, wanted to see me." Nesbegay's face softened. "He is inside. Stronger, but still healing. Sandoval is with him." Rachel looked around at the gathering crowd. "Should I?" Nesbegay beckoned. "Come." Inside, the Hogan smelled of herbs and smoke. The light filtered through a small opening in the roof, illuminating Tso, who lay on blankets against one wall. His bandages had been changed for fresh, hand-woven cloth. Beside him sat Sandoval, the tall warrior, who had once glared at Rachel with suspicion. Their eyes turned toward her in unison. At first, Sandoval's gaze remained guarded, but Zoe managed a faint smile. "Rachel," he said, in a hushed voice. She knelt beside him, surprise flooding her. "You can speak." He nodded weakly. "Some. My father taught me. He traded with settlers." He winced, pressing a hand to his bandaged side. "It is good to see you." She returned his smile, relieved to see color in his cheeks. "I'm glad you're alive and recovering." She glanced at the neat bandages. "Who changed these?" From the opposite side of the Hogan, an elderly woman with long, silvery hair approached. She gently touched Tso's forehead. Nesbegay spoke from behind Rachel. "This is our medicine woman Najoni. She has tended Tso since he arrived. Your help saved him." "She finished the work you began." Tso gestured to his bandages. "You, Bullet," he managed, tapping his ribcage. Rachel nodded, remembering the terrifying moment she pried the metal from his flesh. He whispered, "Thank you." Emotions swelled in her chest. She couldn't speak for a moment, so she simply nodded. After a pause, Tso continued, his voice a little stronger. "We want peace," he said, his gaze flicking to Sandoval. "But soldiers chase." Rachel bit her lip, thinking of Private Everett. She wondered how much Tso's family knew about the army's presence. "The army patrols are increasing," she admitted quietly. "They're searching for you. They suspect raids." Sandoval stiffened. "Raids? We protect our land. Soldiers break treaty. They shoot us if we refuse to move." His English was accented and halting, but the anger in his voice was clear. Nesbegay stepped forward, placing a calming hand on Sandoval's shoulder. "Enough. We do not blame Rachel. She helped Tso when others would have let him die." Sandoval's expression hardened, but he said nothing further. Tso closed his eyes, exhaustion creeping in. Najoni motioned gently for them to let him rest. Outside, the first rays of dawn lit the canyon walls in warm hues of orange and pink. Rachel's emotions tumbled, part awe at the beauty of the place, part fear at the delicate balance she stood upon between these people's rightful desire for self-preservation and the army's determination to enforce its rules. Nesbegay led her a short distance away to a cluster of flat rocks near a small fire pit. Hasba brought them cups of Navajo tea, warm and slightly sweet. Rachel sipped gratefully, the warmth soothing her nerves. After a moment, Nesbegay spoke. "We know the army is searching. We also know your kindness was not an act of betrayal, but of mercy. However, we are uncertain how to proceed. Some want to move deeper into the canyon to avoid the soldiers. Others are tired of running." He searched her face. "What do you think, Rachel Morgan?" She blinked, startled by the question. I only know the soldiers won't stop until they believe there's no threat, whether they're right or wrong." He sighed, lines of worry etched into his features. "We have suffered for many years. Some men, like the Army's Colonel Carson, before tried to force our people onto the Bosque Redondo. We lost many. We will not go back." His voice trembled with old grief. She felt a wave of compassion. "Is there a way to negotiate? Maybe some arrangement so both sides can live in peace?" Nesbegay spread his hands, resignation clear in his eyes. "We have tried to negotiate. The army is often deaf to our words. They break their promises. The land we are allowed is too small or too barren to sustain us. This canyon is our home, but they see only territory to control." Rachel thought of Tso's wounded body, the suspicious glances of the cavalry. A flicker of an idea sparked in her mind. "What if we found a way to show them that you only want to live in peace? If the army found out I was here, they might accuse me of consorting with hostiles. But maybe we can use that to talk. If someone were to come with me, to meet them, to speak face to face," Nesbegay considered. "Perhaps, but it is dangerous. The soldiers might arrest us, or you." Rachel's heart pounded at the thought, but something deep within urged her to try. She had seen enough bloodshed, enough fear. This land was hard enough without men killing each other over it. "I'll speak with them," she said softly, "or at least try. Maybe if I tell them Tso is alive, if we can show them a willingness to talk." Sandoval's voice cut through her words as he emerged from the hogan. "You trust these soldiers?" he demanded, scowling. "They trust no Navajo. They hunt us for sport." Rachel swallowed, understanding his bitterness. "I can't promise they'll listen," she said honestly. "But I do know one or two men who might help, like Dr. McFarlane in Willow Bend. He's neutral, respected by the army. If he could arrange a meeting, it might open a door." Sandoval's nostrils flared, but Nesbegay motioned for calm. "Let us think," he said. "For now, you must rest. Hasba will show you where to sleep." Rachel realized she was bone-weary. She nodded. As the sun rose higher, the hush of the canyon wrapped around her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a deeper labyrinth of conflict. Yet Tso's life, and perhaps the lives of all these people, hinged on the fragile possibility of peace. Rachel spent the day quietly observing life in the canyon. The Navajo band moved with purpose, women tending to meals, and weaving men scouting the surrounding land. Though wary of her presence, no one treated her with hostility. Instead, there was a sense of tense anticipation in the air. Later that afternoon, she sat beside Tso, who was slowly regaining his strength. "Many want to leave," he said, voice low, "hide in the mountains. But it never ends." Rachel understood. You shouldn't have to run forever. As twilight deepened, Nesbegay gathered the leaders by the fire. Rachel was invited to join. The discussion was urgent. Should they trust Rachel's offer to arrange a meeting with the army, or flee and avoid another betrayal? Sandoval pushed for retreat. "They've broken treaties before. They'll do it again." So, despite his weakened state, spoke in favor of a meeting. She helped me, risked much. Not all whites want war. Nez Begay listened quiet but thoughtful. Then he turned to Rachel. How would you convince the army to listen? There's a doctor in Willow Bend, she said. McFarlane. He fought in the war. He's respected and tired of blood. If I speak to him, maybe he can arrange a meeting under a flag of truce. Sandoval scoffed. A flag? The army has burned flags before. Nez Begay raised a hand. She saved Zoe's life. For that we owe her a chance. One meeting. Then we decide. It was agreed Rachel would ride back to Willow Bend at first light to speak with Dr. McFarlane. If he agreed, a peaceful meeting with the army would be proposed. That night, Rachel lay on a woven mat, unable to sleep. Her mind swirled with what-ifs. If this failed, she might be seen as a traitor. But if it worked, it could save lives. At dawn, she and Hasbar slipped quietly from the canyon, taking a route away from known patrols. The rising sun painted the sky with streaks of gold as Rachel rode into uncertainty, driven by a fragile hope that maybe kindness could carve a path through centuries of mistrust. Rachel and Hasbar reached the outskirts of Willow Bend by noon. Hasbar stayed hidden in the hills while Rachel rode into town alone, dust clinging to her dress and worry heavy in her chest. She headed straight to Dr. McFarlane's small office, hoping he'd listen. Inside, the old doctor looked up from his desk, surprised. Rachel Morgan, you look like you've been chased across the desert. She gave a weary smile and got straight to the point, explaining Zoe's rescue, the Navajo band's desire for peace, and her hope that he could help broker a meeting with the army. She left out key locations, but told enough to make her plea clear. Dr. McFarlane listened in silence. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. So they trust you enough to talk peace. They're scared, she said, but they'd rather speak than keep running. After a long pause, the doctor nodded. Captain Bradley at Fort Whipple is no fool. If we come under a flag of truce, there's a chance. I'll send a letter with Sam Hewitt. He's a veteran, Bradley trusts him. Rachel exhaled, deeply grateful. Sam, a grizzled ex-soldier, agreed to deliver the message. No promises, he warned, but I'll do what I can. While they waited for a reply, Rachel stayed at Mary Campbell's boarding house. Word was already spreading in town, rumors of raids, rising fear. Soldiers patrolled more often, and Private Everett's presence grew more menacing by the day. A few nights later, Sam returned. Got a reply, he said, handing Rachel a folded letter. Bradley agrees. He'll meet at the old Spanish mission, 3 Navajo unarmed, at noon in 2 days. Rachel's heart pounded. He gave his word. As much as an army man gives, Sam replied. Mary loaned Rachel a fresh horse, insisting she take a small pistol. You're brave, she whispered, but this world isn't always kind to brave women. Before dawn, Rachel rode out to find the Navajo camp again. The desert stretched endlessly, each mile a test of faith, but her resolve held firm. If peace had even the faintest chance, she had to see it through. Rachel reached the Navajo Canyon by midday, dust clinging to her clothes, determination in her heart. A young scout spotted her and led her to the camp, where Nez Begay met her with wary eyes. You bring news, he asked. She nodded. Captain Bradley agreed to a meeting. 3 men, unarmed, at the old Spanish mission noon, 2 days from now. A wave of tense murmurs rippled through the band. Sandoval's jaw clenched. You trust them? I trust there's a chance, Rachel said quietly. If you don't go, the army will assume you're hostile. Patrols will only get worse. So, still recovering but standing now, placed a hand on his brother's arm. We go. I must speak. Nez Begay nodded solemnly. Then it is decided. At dawn, the small group set off, so Sandoval and Nez Begay, with Rachel guiding them. They rode through the vast, sun-scorched plains, their silhouettes long against the amber morning. By noon, the ruins of the mission came into view. Crumbling adobe walls stood like ghosts of the past. Captain Bradley was already there with a small escort, including Private Everett rifles slung over shoulders. A white flag fluttered in the heat. Rachel's heart thudded as they approached. The soldiers watched with cold scrutiny. Bradley removed his hat and stepped forward. Captain Thomas Bradley, U.S. Army. I come under truce. Speak your peace. Nez Begay took a step forward. We are not raiders. We live on land of our ancestors. But soldiers come with rifles. You push us back. We ask only for peace. Bradley folded his arms. There have been raids, stolen cattle. Our job is to protect settlers. So steadied himself. We are blamed for all. Even when innocent. I was shot running, not fighting. The captain's expression didn't change. But when Dr. McFarlane, standing off to the side, spoke, the tone shifted. They've shown goodwill. Let's find a way to avoid more bloodshed. Bradley sighed. I don't have power to change land boundaries, but I can recommend reducing patrols. If nothing happens, no raids, no violence, I'll write to the governor for a formal meeting. Sandoval scoffed. Words. Always words. Rachel stepped forward. This meeting never would have happened without trust. I risked everything to bring us here. Please let this mean something. After a long silence, Bradley said, a week. I'll send word for a second meeting. No violence until then. Nez Begay bowed slightly. We agree, for now. As the soldiers mounted and rode off, a breeze rustled the broken flag. So looked at Rachel, gratitude and fatigue in his eyes. Without you, this would not be. She gripped his hand gently. Let's hope they keep their word. As they turned to ride back, the desert wind carried a strange stillness. It was not peace, not yet, but it was a beginning. In the weeks that followed, there was no immediate outbreak of violence. True to his word, Captain Bradley reduced patrols near the Navajo Canyon, and Dr. McFarlane received a response from territorial officials expressing a willingness to discuss land rights. Rachel found herself acting as a reluctant messenger, bridging two worlds that had long misunderstood each other. She traveled back and forth between her homestead, Willow Bend, and the Navajo encampment, relaying letters, carrying news, and fostering a fragile trust. So regained his strength, eventually riding out to Rachel's homestead with Nez Begay. There he stood by the well where she'd first found him, remembering how she had saved his life in a moment of pure compassion. Neither spoke much. It seemed unnecessary. Their friendship was etched into the land itself, in the memory of blood washed away by water. Sandoval remained wary, but less hostile toward Rachel. She understood his anger. Years of betrayal and violence were not erased overnight. Yet even he couldn't deny the progress. The army had not attacked, and neither had his people. A small miracle, perhaps, but a miracle born of kindness, perseverance, and the shared desire for survival in a harsh desert land. Some in Willow Bend whispered about Rachel Morgan, the woman who gave water to a wounded Navajo only to wake up surrounded by warriors the next day. Rumors painted her either as a saint or a fool, sometimes both. Yet over time, the gossip died down, replaced by stories of a possible new treaty, of a better arrangement that might keep everyone safe. Nothing was guaranteed. Tensions still simmered, but for a moment, like the delicate bloom of a cactus flower in the desert, hope blossomed where fear had once taken root. In the end, Rachel Morgan's simple act of compassion, giving water to a wounded Navajo, sparked a tenuous peace in a land scorched by distrust. So Yazzie recovered and stood beside his family under a wavering treaty that promised both sides a chance to rebuild. Though the shadows of broken promises and the threat of violence would never fully vanish, a fragile hope took hold in the hearts of those willing to strive for understanding. This is the story of one woman's courage in the face of overwhelming odds and one man's journey from wounded outcast to a beacon of unity for his people. Their story reminds us that in life's harshest deserts, a single act of kindness can plant the seeds of change. If this tale moved you, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together we can keep stories of compassion and resilience alive, inspiring hope across the frontier and beyond.